Dan Dickau here for Gonzaga Nation SI. This is the second week of February, so this means it's the second bracketology update. If you listened in last week we gave you a little bit of what Joe Lunardi bracket looks like, a little bit of what Jerry Palm's bracket looks like. To me, those are two of the best to follow. There's a number of bracketologists out there. A lot of them have spawned off of the new interest and advancement in a lot of the analytics sites, and so just want to keep track of following Lenardi and Jerry Palm throughout these next couple weeks leading into Selection Sunday. CBS does have their pre-selection show coming up February 19th. That's going to be interesting to see if Gonzaga is projected as the 1 seed in the West, or maybe even the overall number 1 seed, which they're definitely in consideration for that, especially after Auburn lost earlier this week in the SEC. So let's just get right to it. So we're going to look at Lenardi's. We're going to look at Jerry Palm's. I'm going to break down a little bit of what the net rankings really look at and kind of share with you what quad 1 and quad 2, quad 3, and quad 4 wins or games are. Really, we just need to look at quad 1 and 2 because if you win a quad 3 or 4 game, it really doesn't make much difference. It's looked at if you're competing for a high seed like Gonzaga is, or battling for bubble seed like BYU and USF now unfortunately look to be doing. You gotta win all your quad 3s and your quad 4s. It's really difficult to have multiple quad 4 or quad 3 losses and still get into the NCAA tournament as an at-large bid. So we'll just jump right into it. So Joe Lunardi with ESPN, probably the most well-known bracketologist. A lot of it because ESPN is a big-time face of college basketball. But Lunardi has Gonzaga as the overall number 1 seed, which is awesome if you're a Zag fan. He has St. Mary's as a 9. He has USF still in as an 11, and one of the last 4 buys. So that's big because USF just lost a home game to Portland. Now, I know a lot of people think, well, Portland, they're really bad. Portland has been really bad. Okay, so Portland last year, they were in the 300s in Ken Palm Analytics. They were in the 300s in net. This year, they are much improved, although not great. They're in the 220 range, I believe, when I checked yesterday after seeing that loss. So it's a bad loss for USF, but it's not a monumentally bad loss. Very similar to BYU's loss last week to Pacific. It's a bad loss, but it's not a monumentally bad loss in regards that it's going to completely push you off the cliff and not allow you to have a at-large bid. So with that being said, BYU and Lunardi's poll, or his bracketology update, which came out this morning, BYU's still in. They are the absolute last team in as of now, per Joe Lunardi. So they are the last team in as a 12 seed. So they're in that play-in game, but they're still in the NCAA tournament. But he also has a note in his email newsletter that goes out to broadcasters and analysts like myself that if BYU were to lose to LMU today on the road, they would completely drop out of the field. Now, obviously, this can change. Big wins, run in the WCC tournament, etc. But, well, I guess really what it gets at is BYU and USF, they've lost all wiggle room right now in regards to bad losses can't happen the rest of the way out. That being also said, Santa Clara continues to move up. Santa Clara now, they're going to have to win the conference tournament to make the NCAA tournament. But you're looking at a team that is really playing well. So they could be an interesting game for St. Mary's, which they just beat earlier this week. They could be an interesting game for USF. They could be an interesting game for BYU. And obviously Gonzaga has one more game against Santa Clara here at home. Shouldn't matter. Gonzaga went on the road, beat Santa Clara by about 40. but they're showing signs of life. I mean, uh, with Joseph Vrankic in the lineup, they're 13-4. With him out, they're 4-4. So you kind of make that, look, and you say, hey, I think had they maybe won a couple more of those games when Brankic was out, or if he wasn't out and they continued to play well, we might have been looking at another team. I'm not saying WCC would have 5 teams. Not saying that, but you would have another team in the strong conversation, because as it is now, and we'll touch on quad one and quad two wins. That's important that Santa Clara keeps improving, because that improves the chances for the other 4 teams to have a quad one win. So uh, we'll move on to Jerry Palm now, CBS bracketologist. He's also, just like Lenardi, he's been one of the best at this for a number of years. He updated his on Monday afternoon, evening. So this one's a little bit more outdated in regards to didn't have the USF loss to Portland, and maybe some of the power conference teams, such as excuse me, Auburn's loss wasn't in his projections just yet. Obviously, the Auburn project loss really only affects Gonzaga to slide up to the number 1 overall seed. But Jerry Palm has Gonzaga as a 1 seed out west, with Kentucky as a 2 seed. And that means Arizona is their own 1 seed in their own right, which is interesting. I know a lot of people, Adam and I touched on this in our podcast the other day. There's going to be a lot of interest if Gonzaga and Arizona were 1-2 in the West and they matched up to go to a Final Four. That would be a very interesting one if that were the case. Then that did come to fruition. But the other teams in the WCC, per Jerry Palm's projections, he has St. Mary's as a 7 seed in the East against Boise State. He has USF still in. This was before their loss to Portland, so that's going to be interesting to see how this one shakes out early next week when we take a look at it. But he has USF as an 8 seed in the South region against Seton Hall, and he has BYU solidly in as a 12, not in the last 4 in, but just as a 12 against Tennessee. So those are awesome and interesting to see that both Jerry Palm, Joe Lenardi still have 4 WCC teams in the NCAA tournament at this time. And the reason, I keep mentioning this and talking about this is, the Pac-12 is a very good league. It has been the best league on the West Coast since its inception. But all leagues go in ebbs and flows. And right now, I think the Pac-12, after having a great run in the NCAA tournament last year with surprises like Oregon State going deep, USC going deep, UCLA making a surprising run in the Final Four, although they're backing it up this year. They're on a kind of a downward ebb right now this season. Now, I would expect them to get it back next year, but the WCC, if they could take advantage of a down Pac-12 year and a up WCC year, why not get excited about 4 teams making the NCAA tournament out of the league? I still think it's a solid, legit 3. I think there's a huge chance for 4, which personally I would love to see. But they both have 4 teams in as of now. But when you look at the net now, and this is where it gets interesting, and this is why it's so important. So the NCAA Selection Committee looks at RPI, even though that's a very outdated metric now. They also do look at the polls. It's just human nature, because you also have the eye test that you have to take into consideration and take into effect. And that's one reason, the selection committee will kind of lock themselves in a conference room for, 7 days or so during the conference tournament week and watch as many games and talk through as many scenarios as possible, because they also want the teams that are playing the best at that moment in time. Because maybe an injury really impacted the team early in the season. They got a player back or players back, and now they're playing well at the end of the year. And maybe they're at that mid 50s in the net, which I think would give a lot of smaller conference schools in that area a lot of pause to get too excited. But many times you would see a lot of power conference teams in that 50 to 55 range still feel that they have a shot, especially if they play well and go deep into their conference tournaments. But right now with the net, the WCC has 4 teams in the top 46. GU at 1, St. Mary's 23, USF 41, BYU 46, and then, like I said, Santa Clara 67, which is very important. The WCC would hope that they stay in that top 75, and I'll explain more why when I touch on quad 1 and 2 wins. The Pac-12 at this time, they've got 4 teams in the top 40 and 5 in the top 50. So Arizona at 2, UCLA at 14, USC at 29. Those are solid, legit, no concerns and worries. But this is where you start getting a little bit of concern about, does the Pac-12 get a 4th? Do they maybe even get a 5th? Washington State is sitting right now at 37 in the net. They've got a home game this week against Arizona. If they were able to knock off Arizona in Pullman, that would be a monumental win for Kyle Smith and the Cougars. And you would imagine it would vault them up into the low 30s, and now at the low 30s, as long as they don't lay any quad 4 losses, you're very comfortable with your chances going into the Pac-12 conference tournament as well as selection committee. And then the number 5 team in the Pac-12, the Oregon Ducks, sitting at 50. And if you follow college basketball in the Northwest, Dana Altman works magic year after year. So I would expect them to continue to flirt with being on the bubble and being in a lot of bracketology kind of updates. So that's why it's important to look at that league as well as the Mountain West. The Mountain West has 6 teams in the top 60. Wyoming 28, Boise State 34, Colorado State 36, Utah State at 44, who's playing really good basketball right now. They're actually like top 25 in the KenPom, which is one of the analytics that is used. San Diego State at 55, Fresno State at 57. Right now, the way I see it, I see a 4-bid league in the Mountain West. I see Wyoming, Boise State, Colorado State, and then one of Utah State, San Diego State, or Fresno State being in the tournament. And this is dependent on how deep one of them can get in the NCAA tournament. In the Mountain West tournament, which will be in Las Vegas, same week that Gonzaga is down in Vegas for the WCC. But, people will always ask, well, how can the WCC get 4 teams if in years past they haven't been able to do that? Well, a couple of reasons why is Gonzaga, you can just pencil them in or Sharpie it in November 1st, typically the first game of the year. Gonzaga's in the tournament. And then it's always St. Mary's, BYU, where are we at? A lot of times you'll get a second team. But you got to give Randy Bennett, St. Mary's, a lot of credit. They have performed this year. They've elevated their scheduling. So some of their non-conference games have been road wins, which elevates their net ranking. And when your multiple teams within your league have elevated their net rankings, it gives more opportunities for good wins in the eyes of the selection committee. And the reason that's important is because people always say, well, how can we compete with an ACC or Big 12, Big 10, SEC, whatever, because their RPIs their nets are so high. Well, if you just take a quick look at it, I would agree with that this year with the Big 12, the Big 10, and the SEC. The Big 12, for example, has 9 teams in the top 70 of the net. So every single team in the Big 12, because oddly enough, the Big 12 has 9 teams, every single team is top 70. So what that means is, and we'll touch more on this in a second, every single one of those games is a quad 1 or 2 victory or loss. Quad 1 loss is not going to hurt too badly. A quad 2 loss shouldn't hurt too badly. They're really basically just start beating up on each other. The Big 10, very similar. 9 teams in the Big 10 right now are in the top 70 of net. So again, they just kind of beat up on each other. And this is why it's so important for the league to get to a standard and then kind of stay at that standard with the amount of good games that they schedule, with the amount of success that they've had in the past, which is huge. And then the SEC, they have 5 teams in the top 60 in the net. So their bottom's not quite as good. Obviously, Georgia's really bad. Drawing a blank on the other team I looked at in the net today, but that's another opportunity where, you look at Alabama. They've gone on a slide. They're still top 22, I think it is, in net even though they've had a number of losses. But their games, non-conference, has been a gauntlet. They played Gonzaga. They've played, anybody that would have the ability to boost and bolster their Ken Palm analytics, their RPI analytics, even though it's more of an outdated number system now, or their net. They took that chance and went to play there. Nate Oates, I've texted with him on occasion. He doesn't really necessarily care about the amount of losses. He cares about, are we playing our best basketball in March? And a lot of his philosophy is challenge ourselves all the way through so that we've seen everything, we've been through everything, our numbers analytically and in the net are solid, and we know where we have to get better at. And so that, if we're playing our best basketball in March, we're going to have a chance to get a good seed in the NCAA tournament. So I think his path is playing out well, even though they haven't won all the games maybe that you would expect or hope to see. So that's a little bit about that. Now, the one outlying league this year, and I touched on the Pac-12 really kind of only having 3 solid teams at this point, would be the ACC. I mean, the ACC, there's been times they've had 7, 8 teams from that conference in. Right now, when you look at it, Duke's at 11, Wake Forest is at 32, North Carolina, who, when I've seen them this year, they don't look great. They're sitting at 41, Virginia Tech 43, and then you've got a big jump. You've got a lot of teams that are kind of in that tier, in that quad 2 type of category. Notre Dame 63, Miami 72, Virginia 80, Clemson 81, Syracuse 83, and Florida State 93. So what you're seeing is those teams, they're good, but they're not great. They've had chances to get pick up quad 1 wins, but they haven't capitalized and taken advantage of it. And so I really see the ACC as being a 3-bid league. With Duke, Wake Forest, maybe North Carolina, but it's out of those, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and the rest of the teams down the league. You got to see how these last few weeks play out, and that's where I think it's very important for a Gonzaga fan or a WCC fan to want the powers in these leagues to not give up an upset. Virginia beat Duke the other day. You don't want to see that. You want to see, the teams that are above you continue to hold their place and not drop against teams that are lower than them in the net. But on to what the quad 1 and quad 2 wins and games really are, and this is where it gets really important and really determine a lot. And you're going to hear a lot of conversation on that when you're listening to and watching college basketball games over these next few weeks. Is a quad 1 win is a game at home against a top 30 opponent. So if you have a home game and you beat a top 30 team, you get a quad 1 win. So every time Gonzaga goes and plays a road game the rest of the way out, that's a quad 1 opportunity for that team, right? But for Gonzaga, say it's against, and I know Gonzaga doesn't play University of Portland this year, but if they were to go to University of Portland, that would be a quad 1 opportunity for Portland. But for Gonzaga, it would be, I believe, a quad 3 win because of Portland being in the 220 to 250 range on the road and in the net. Now, that being said, for example, a 1 through 50 win is on a neutral court is also considered a road win, or a quad 1 win, excuse me. A 1 through 75 win against a team in the top 75 on the road is also a quad 1 win. And why does this make it so interesting? Well, I mentioned earlier that Santa Clara has bumped up to top 75 in the net. They're at 67. So that beat down that Gonzaga put on Santa Clara in the Levy Center, a few weeks back, it didn't, it was, hey, quad, no, nobody gets too excited about it. But now when you look at it, that's a quad 1 win because Santa Clara is top 75 in the net and Gonzaga went on the road and won it. And you want to be able to stack up as many quad 1 wins as possible because, again, one of the determining factors that the selection committee looks at is the net and the amount of good quad 1 and quad 2 wins. So let's touch on quad 2 real quickly. A quad 2 win would be a home game against a team in the top 31 to 75 of net. So again, I mentioned Santa Clara on the road at 67. That's a quad 1. Well, Santa Clara comes here, and if they continue to stay in that top 75, that is a quad 2 win, as opposed to if it was 76, then that would be considered a quad 3 win. So that's why these numbers are becoming so important. So you want to see the WCC teams that are kind of on that bubble, that USF, the BYU, you want them to make sure that they take care of every opportunity to get a quad 1 win the rest of the way out if possible. If one of them were to get a quad 1 win against Gonzaga, obviously as a Gonzaga fan you'd be disappointed, but it's hugely important for the league. And then you also, as unfortunately you saw Pacific knock off BYU and Portland knock off USF. Those are not good wins. Those are not good losses for the Dons and the Cougars. So that's where hopefully, if you're listening, you're seeing the difference of how important these games are, and you're also seeing how important it is that Santa Clara continues to climb in their rankings. So that loss that BYU had at Santa Clara on a buzzer beater few weeks back, that's deemed a better loss than it was when it happened, because Santa Clara continues to elevate in the rankings. So the other factors of a quad 2 victory or game would be a neutral site game against a 51 through 100 team, and then a road game for a 76 through 135. So if you look at it right now, there's 5 teams that provide opportunities for each other in the WCC to get quad 1 wins, whether it's home or away. Obviously, that's the part of the determining factors. But so lots of information out there. Keep checking us out, Gonzaga Nation SI, on all the social media platforms, our YouTube, our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter, our TikTok. Check them all out. If you've got a question for Adam or myself on our weekly shows, send it our way on social media, and we'll do our best to answer it. That being said, a big week of WCC action is coming up, and I think there's going to be a lot of changes next week when we talk about the bracketology updates and track how the league is going. So for Gonzaga Nation SI, I'm Dan Dickau.